Hey everyone, this is Megan Dashi, and I was just looking over my YouTube profile, and I noticed that I haven't made a video in quite some time. So I decided to just continue off from No Easy Day, the autobiography by Mark Owen of the Osama bin Laden mission, and the movie Zero Dark 30 just came out recently, and it's a great movie. I saw it, very good. You should go see it. Thank you very much, enjoy it, and I see that we last left off with Chapter 4, so let's go ahead and get started on Chapter 5. Chapter 5, Point Man. In December 2006, we were deployed to western Iraq. It was my third deployment at the command. I had spent one rotation working closely with the CIA. It felt good to be back with the guys instead of helping the agency plan and train their Afghan fighters. We worked with a lot of other units, but it was always better with the boys because we were cut from the same cloth. My troop was working along the Syrian border and in some of Iraq's nastiest towns, like Ramadi, home to Al-Qaeda, Iraq. There. Our job was to target high-level couriers that brought in foreign fighters and Iranian weapons. The Marines in Al-Anbar asked if we could help conduct an operation to clear and secure a series of houses in a village near the Syrian border. The village was a safe haven for insurgents, and several leaders were staying near the center of town. The plan was for us to hit the houses at night, and then the Marines would surround the village and relieve us in the morning. Even with the team crowded into a Black Hawk, I was fighting to keep warm. We had a combat assault dog with us. We used it to detect bombs and help track enemy fighters. I tried to get the dog to sit on my lap to warm me up. Every time I got him close to me, the handler would pull him away. It was freezing when we landed about 4 miles from the Iraqi village. Shielding my eyes from the dust, I waited for the helicopters to leave. I could hear their engines fade away minutes later, heading east back to Al-Assad Air Base. I stamped my feet and rubbed my hands together, trying to get the circulation moving, while we got organized to move out. Even though I'd been to Iraq twice before, the third deployment was different. The enemy had evolved. So like SEALs do best. We adapted. Instead of flying to the X like we did in the past, we started to land miles away and patrol in quietly. This way the enemy couldn't hear the helicopters. We were transitioning from being loud and fast, taking the enemy surprise, to being soft and slow and retaining the element of surprise for even longer. We could creep through their houses and into their bedrooms and wake them before they had a chance to fight back. But patrolling to the target wasn't easy, especially in the cold winter night. The wind cut into our uniforms as we moved toward the village. I was near the front, acting as a point man for my team. One of the key lessons learned early on in my SEAL's career was the ability to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. It was a lesson I had learned as a kid in Alaska checking the trap line with my dad. When it got cold in Iraq or during Hell Week in Buds, my mind used to wander back to Alaska. I could always hear the roar of the snowmobile as my father and I headed toward the line of traps he kept miles from the village and deep into Alaska's wilderness. Remember how it felt like the snowmobile was floating through the fresh powder, and how as we turned it was like being on a surfboard cutting into a wave. The temperature hovered near zero, and our warm breath crystallized in the air. On one cold winter day in Alaska, I was wrapped tightly in the tan car hat snowsuit, winter boots, and gloves. A beaver hat, hand sewn by my mother, covered my ears, and a scarf protected my face, leaving only my eyes exposed. I was warm except for my hands and feet. We'd been out for hours, and I could barely feel my toes. I tried to wiggle them in my thick wool socks, but it wasn't helping. Huddled behind my father to block the wind, all I could think about was how cold my hands and feet were. We'd already gotten a couple of marten, a cat-sized weasel with a bushy tail like a squirrel and a soft coat of brown fur. My father traded the pelts in the village to make a little extra money, or my mother would make hats for my sisters. But the biting cold took the thrill out of the time I was spending with my dad. Any fun I was having disappeared with the last feeling of warmth in my body. I had begged my father to go on the trip. "Are you sure?" he said. "You know it's going to be cold." "I want to go," I said. I wanted to hang out with my father and didn't want to be stuck back at the house. This guy was tough, and he taught me how to shoot and hunt. As I got older, he trusted me to hunt and fish on my own, and I'd take the family boat up the river for a week at a time. In a way, it was my first taste of big boy rules, and I thrived. Plus, I wouldn't have to sit at home with the girls. I always wanted to be outside. I love the outdoors, just not all the cold weather. I knew that if my dad let me come with him, I couldn't be the kid complaining about the cold. But now, a few hours into the trip, all I wanted were warm hands and feet. "Dad!" I screamed into the wind as we drove. "Dad, my feet are frozen." My father, dressed in the same snowsuit hat, slowed to a stop. He turned back, and I imagined he saw a small boy with his teeth chattering behind a scarf. "I'm freezing," he said. "We only have a few more straps," my father said. "Do you think you can make it?" I just looked at him, not wanting to answer no. I didn't want to let him down. I stared at him, hoping he'd make the choice for me. "I can't feel my feet," I said. "Get off here and start walking behind the snowmobile. Follow my tracks. I'm going to keep going. I won't be far ahead of you. Stick to the tracks and keep moving because that'll keep your feet warm." I slid off the back of the snow machine and adjusted the .22 rifle strapped to my back. "You got it?" my father asked. I nodded. He started the engine and headed toward the next trap. I started walking and my feet warmed up. Outdoorsmen paid thousands of dollars to experience the Alaska tundra, but for most of my childhood, all I had to do was walk outside my door. My family had a sense of adventure not found in most people. When I was 5 years old, we moved to a small Eskimo village in the interior of Alaska. My parents were missionaries who met in college in California and found that their faith not only allowed them to spread Christianity, but also appealed to their sense of adventure. Besides his missionary work, my father worked for the state. The job required a college degree, and my father was one of the few people in the village that had one. My mother stayed home with us. She helped with homework and kept my sisters and me on track. I was the middle child between two sisters. We were a tight family because there wasn't a lot to do in the village. Winters were brutal, so we'd huddle around the kitchen table and play board games. But calling it a town by normal standards would be generous. We had 2 stores, together no bigger than a small truck stop, a small school, and a post office. No mall, no movie theater, but you could rent movies at one of the stores. The crown jewel of my town was the runway. It was just large enough to land a 737 jet as well as some of the bigger propeller-driven cargo planes. That made our village the hub of the region. Bush planes would come in and out of the town, bringing hunters and outdoorsmen from Anchorage to the more remote villages spread along the river. We lived in a 2-story house 100 yards off the river. The house had a beautiful view of picturesque Alaska, I guess. I'm sorry. Sorry if I'm being stupid, and that's actually a really easy word. Sometimes when I was lucky, I could see a moose or a bear from my front door. If I wasn't in school, I was out hunting or fishing. From the time I was a little kid, I was comfortable using a gun and moving in the woods, and being responsible for myself. During BUDS training, I excelled at land warfare. It was really no different than my hunting trips as a kid. With varying backgrounds at BUDS, guys were stronger in different areas. I did fine in the water too, but I felt most comfortable during the weapons and the land warfare training. So when I got to DevGru, I typically acted as the point man for my assault team. On this cold night in Iraq, the 4-mile patrol to the target village took about an hour. It was close to 3 a.m. when we arrived. As we got close, I could see the lights from the Iraqi village flickering across the highway. It was a dusty shithole. Light blue plastic shopping bags blew down the street. The smell of raw sewage from a ditch that ran along the road hung on the wind. I could just make out the biscuit-colored houses, which had a faint green hue under my night vision goggles. The power lines that ran along the highway into Syria sagged. Everything looked ratty and run down. As we got to the village, the team started to peel off to their predetermined targets. I led my team to our target building. Creeping up to the gate, I tried the handle. The heavy black iron door creaked open. Pushing it wide enough to see in, I scanned the courtyard. It was empty. The front door of the 2-story house had a large window covered by an ornate gate. I could see inside the foyer as my teammates' lasers searched inside from the first floor windows. I slowly pushed open the front door of the house. It was unlocked. I paused at the threshold, my rifle at the ready, and waited. Looking over my shoulder, one of my teammates gave me a thumbs up. I blinked the dust out of my eyes to make sure I could see before stepping inside. I was wearing my cumbersome op gear over a winter jacket as I tried to move like a cat. Think quiet, I told myself. The foyer was cramped. A small generator sat on the floor. There was a door straight ahead of me and another door to my right, ignoring the door to my right because it was blocked by a generator. I crept through the small door in front of me. My senses were on fire. I strained to hear any movement up ahead as I scanned the empty room. The smell of kerosene from the family's heating stove attacked my nostrils. Every step that I took seemed like a huge crash. We were trained to anticipate an insurgent with a suicide vest or an AK-47 behind any door, ready to attack. Curtains covered the doorway leading back to the bedrooms. I hated the curtains because at least with a door you felt a little protected. I had no idea if someone was looking under the curtain or was just waiting for my shadow to pass in front so that he could shoot. This was the endgame. There was no way these rooms could be empty. We had no idea if the occupants had heard us. On my previous deployment with Delta, several of their guys were killed when they entered a house and got ambushed by a fighter hiding behind a sandbag wall. It was a deadly lesson we never forgot, and it was always in the back of our minds as we entered a target. I paused for a second or two, hoping to draw out any impatient ambushers. The light was on in the room behind the curtain. Flipping my night vision goggles up, I slowly pulled the curtain aside. A long, slender refrigerator stood at the elbow of an L-shaped hallway. I spotted a door ajar and moved to quickly cover it while my teammates flooded the hallway, clearing the other rooms. One of my teammates followed me as we pushed open the door and cleared into a bedroom. There was no talking. Everyone knew his job. 3 mattresses were on the floor, and I could barely make out 2 eyes staring at me from the corner of the dark room. It was a young man with wispy facial hair and dark eyes. He seemed nervous, and his eyes kept shifting from side to side as we moved inside. It struck me as odd that he just sat there staring at me. There were 2 women, also awake, staring at the door. I immediately started moving towards the man. I knew something wasn't right because men usually sleep in a different room. As I passed the women, I held out my hand, waving at them to be calm. The man started to try and talk. "Shh," I whispered. I didn't want him to alert any men who might be in another room. His gaze never left me. I grabbed him by his right arm and yanked him up, pushing the blankets away to make sure he didn't have a weapon. Holding him against the wall, I pulled the blankets off the women. Sleeping between the women was a small girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old. When I moved the blanket off her, the girl's mother grabbed her and pulled her close. I guided the man into the center of the room and secured his hands together with flex cuffs, plastic handcuffs, and slid a hood over his head. Oh, sorry. My teammate watched the women while I quickly searched the man's pockets. I then pushed the man to his knees and shoved his head into the corner. He tried to talk, but I pressed his face against the wall, muffling his voice. Our troop chief, who was running the mission, popped his head in the door. "What do you have?" he said. "1 MAM, I said, which is shorthand for military-aged male. Still need to search the room." I walked to the far corner of the room, next to the mattress, and saw the brown stock of an AK-47, resting on a pile of small plastic bags with a green chest rack, used to carry extra magazines and a grenade. "Got an AK over here," I said. "Chest rack, grenade." Fuck. I was pissed we hadn't seen the weapons earlier. My teammate who covered the women hadn't seen them either when we came into the room. The man I found in the room was definitely a fighter, and a smart one too. He hid his gun, chest rack, and a hand grenades just out of reach and well enough for us not to see him on our initial entry into the room. Everything inside me wanted to shoot this guy right here on the spot. We knew the rules we had to follow, and he was using them against us. We couldn't shoot him unless he posed a threat. If he had any balls, he would have lit us up coming through the door. He knew we were in the house. The man must have heard us come in and thought he could hide with the women. With the house secure, I led the man to another room to question him. The room's floor was covered in rugs, and sleeping mats were piled in a heap in the center of the room. A TV on the floor was on, but the screen was just static. Our interpreter stood next to the man as I pulled the hood up. His face was sweaty and his eyes were big as he tried to adjust to the light. "Ask him why he had grenades in a chest rack," I told the interpreter. "I'm a guest here," the man said. "Why were you sleeping with the women and children? Guests don't sleep next to the women." "One of them is my wife," he said. "But I thought you were a guest here," I said. The questioning went on like that for about a half hour. He never got his story straight, and the next morning we turned him over to the Marines. It was frustrating because missions were like this day after day. It was a catch-and-release system. We'd roll him up, and a few weeks later the fighters would be back on the streets. I was confident the fighter we found in the bedroom would be released soon. The only way to permanently take them off the streets is if they were dead. We found out later from some of the village elders that the men, including the fighter I encountered in the women's bedroom, were part of an insurgent cell that rotated between the houses of the village. This guy we captured had gone home that night to stay with his family. 3 other guys in his cell were killed the same night after a short firefight with my teammates. My teammates got lucky and got the jump on them before the insurgents reacted. Our troop uncovered guns, mines, and explosives for roadside bombs in the house. After clearing our initial targets, our troops searched the majority of the houses in the village. In one of the bedrooms, I found a pile of bras in one of the drawers. I fished out a nice white one with lace and a bow in the center. Balling it up, I stuffed it into the cargo pocket in my pants for later. Outside, the bop 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 of the Marines' massive CH-53 helicopters echoed in the village. The sun was coming up as we held security positions in the nearby house. It was freezing. Mornings always seemed to be the coolest part of the day. I looked up in time to see what looked like two big gray school buses fly over me, make a 90-degree turn, and settle into the open desert just north of the power lines. The ramps in the back dropped down, and out came the Marines, just like you've seen in their commercials. My troop chief walked past me to coordinate with the Marines so we could turn over the village and go home. "You see their HQ?" he said. "I think they are down the road," I said, pointing toward a cluster of men in radio antennas. As he passed by, I fished out the bra from earlier that night and discreetly draped it on the radio antenna attached to his back. When it was cold and miserable, it is the little things that warm you up. As he passed some of the Marines, I saw them stare at him and laugh. "Hey, where's your HQ?" the troop chief asked a nearby Marine. He pointed down the road. "Hey, sir, you've got a bra hanging off your back," the Marine said. "Yeah, I'm sure there is," the troop chief said without hesitation, glancing back in our direction. Happens all the time. On the patrol back to the landing zone in the desert, I noticed something in the periphery vision blowing in the wind. Reaching back, I pulled on a bra strap. Someone had hung a bra on the bolt cutters I had strapped to my back. Pranks on the team were a way of life. The pranking was so frequent that the squadron eventually built a wire diagram connecting all the suspected culprits. We used the same wire diagram to track terrorists. We had the names of all the guys in a pyramid with the worst prankster on top. Phil, my team leader at the time. Phil had been in the Navy forever. He graduated Green Team the year I graduated Buds, left DevGru for a break, and joined the Leapfrogs, the Navy's parachute demonstration team. He also served a military freefall instructor before returning to the command. I met Phil during my first days in the squadron and instantly liked him. He did several tours as an assaulter, then headed up the squadron's combat assault log program before becoming a team leader. Phil was a great prankster, maybe the best. At least once, I came back to my cage and found the shoelaces on all of my boots for my right foot cut. I couldn't prove Phil did it. I knew he had large I couldn't prove Phil did it. I knew he had large magnets, which he'd wave over your wallet to demagnetize the strip on your credit card. He is famous for bombing all of your gear with glitter. I don't know how many pouches and uniforms I had to replace because purple glitter was caked on the Velcro or strapped in the folds of the fabric. When things got slow, he'd create a feud. "All right, who pranked me?" he would yell, walking into the team room. We all knew he pranked himself. He was trying to stir up a war because he was bored. Sometimes the guys did get him back. One Friday night after work, we all walked to the parking lot to find Phil's car high in the air. One of his victims, and it was never clear who, picked up his car with a forklift and left it there. One of the longest-running pranks in the squadron started with Phil. When we weren't deployed, we all trained over the United States. On this night, we were in Miami doing some urban training. It was just getting dark, and we were scheduled to practice CQB in an old abandoned hotel. Before we started training, Phil and the local police, who kept onlookers away, went in to make sure it was empty. We didn't want to start training and run up on some homeless squatter. At the time, Phil was still working as a dog handler. As we walked the halls, Phil glanced into a room and saw something sticking out of the drywall. It was a giant 12-inch black dildo. Sliding a rubber glove on, Phil pulled it out of the wall and carried it downstairs. "Look what I found," he says, waving it over his head. "Get that thing away from me," I said, backing away as it flopped back and forth in his hand. With the hotel clear, we started to train. It was just before dawn when we finished. After I put my kit in the trunk of my rental car, I was exhausted and I collapsed behind the wheel. As I went to start the car, I noticed that I had something attached to my steering wheel. "Phil!" I yelled, practically jumping out of my car to get away from it. I looked around, but Phil was gone. He'd already fled the scene of the crime. The dildo was strapped to my steering wheel. It stretched from the 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock position. I cut it off the steering wheel and put it in a random helmet in one of the equipment bags. The dildo, which came to be called the Staff of Power, disappeared. We forgot about it for a few months until in Virginia Beach after we'd finished some gas mask training. Since DevGru is tasked with hunting down weapons of mass destruction, we often trained in the kill house in full chemical suits. The gas mask took a while to get used to, and we had to be comfortable operating in suits and masks for long periods. It was the end of the day, and we all came up to the team room after to get a beer. I walked in and headed over to the refrigerator, popping the cap and taking a long pull. I turned back and saw some of the guys huddled around the foot of the conference table. "Holy shit," I heard one of them say. "No way, that isn't it, is it?" Another one said. I walked over to the crowd and saw a Polaroid picture taped to a black sheet of paper. The staff of power was coiled in someone's gas mask. As soon as I saw the picture, my stomach flipped. I had no idea where the staff had been before Phil snagged it, and now it could have been in my gas mask. The same mask I spent hours in that day. I tried to see if the mask in question was mine, but the picture was shot so tightly it was impossible to tell. In that minute, the staff of power was in everybody's nest and everybody's mask, and no one was going to take the chance. I followed the crowd down to supply and traded in my mask for a new one. Again, the staff of power was missing in action for a few months. There was always food in the kitchen, and guys used to bring in massive jugs of pretzels and other snacks from Costco. One day, a bin of animal crackers appeared in the team room. Handful by handful, the crackers started to disappear. You'd see guys eating crackers as they walked from the kitchen to their cages or out to the ranges. Soon enough, about halfway through the jug, we found another Polaroid picture. This time, the staff of power was jammed into the middle of the bin with animal crackers piled up around the shaft. To this day, I still can't eat animal crackers. I have no idea if Phil was the culprit. I knew he was the one who found it, but to date the staff of power is still unaccounted for. And that is the end of chapter 5, guys. Very strange ending, if I do say so myself. If you guys liked it, go ahead and like this video, and I'll be back with chapter 6 as soon as I can, and I promise I will not make such a long delay this time. I just had a few problems with my mouse and laptop, but that's just my luck with technology. So, I'll see you guys later then.